Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the final day of our conference. Our first speaker is, I believe, the only student in this conference, which is something, she's special to be here as a speaker today. Colleen usually comes to our lab to steal our drones, and then she takes them to map marine geography. So she will be having a talk today about using drones to monitor algae patches on reefs in the Red Sea. Welcome, Colleen.
This talk is in progress, so that some things are done, but some things are still being done. So if you have ideas, I'm welcome to open to those. So talking today about using drones to monitor algae and other parts of reefs. So why are algae important? So I know a lot of you aren't marine science. We'll talk about a lot of things. Algae comes in two major forms, micro and macro. Microalgae is very small, as the name suggests, and it's usually not visible to the naked eye. And the type of algae we're going to be referring to in this presentation is macroalgae, or what we sometimes like to refer to as seaweed. And it's visible to your eyes, and it comes in a lot of sizes and shapes and colors and textures. Those of you who went out today to snorkel or scuba dive may have seen some algae. Algae is important because it helps the reef by providing structure, homes, food, producing sands, and nutrient retention. So in the Red Sea, there's over 300 species of algae. The varieties come in green, brown, red, cyan. And it comes in, like I said, shapes and sizes and textures, and they are vital for the reef. So how is algae monitored? The way that algae is studied in the field is, well, for one, microalgae is done with satellite imagery, and it is monitored because it's often together. It's like in groups, right? And we can see that using like chlorophyll imagery, that can be viewed like in this image here at the top. So this is from NASA. And then if there's like a large bloom or something like that, that can also be seen from satellite imagery. And the main way algae is studied in the field, like this macroalgae here, if you look, there's like a tape going down the middle. It's like measuring tape. And this involves marking a beginning and end point. A person goes through and they look at what they're seeing, and they catalog that. They have like a little clipboard with underwater paper, and they write down what's going on. And so you might think that like satellite imagery would be great for macroalgae as well, but it's not, unless it's in really large patches. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we see when we look at an image, and that is a raster. So images, what we're getting like from satellite or a drone, come in these rasters. A raster is where the information is stored in a grid form like this. And those are our pixels. In this grid, we have the information stored uniformly throughout the grid. And that doesn't mean that each cell can't have a different color within it. Like if you come into the grid and you zoom in, it might have multiple colors. It just means that whenever that grid is a part of the grid, it will have that same information regardless of where you're touching on the cell. So the information can be gained like from the cell. The smaller the cell, the more information we get. A Landsat image pixel is the size of 30 meters, which means that anything under 30 meters is indistinguishable. To give some perspective on that, a house cannot be seen from Landsat imagery. Even if the house is 30 meters, it looks just like colored blobs. So highways are kind of easy to see on satellite imagery because they have cover a long distance, and then that can be distinguished. So here's a picture of that. You can see the difference between the cell size of a drone and like Landsat. This obviously can be zoomed in further to its pixel size, but this is at the same like resolution, right? So you can't see that this is even a stadium. Same place, and clearly the drone image is clearer, and that's due to the pixel size being smaller. So all kinds of things can determine the pixel size available. Some of the options are based on the camera capacity, how good it is, and others based on the height of the drone. Just like if you're far away from something, it's harder for you to see it. The imagery we were talking about today was taken at 30 meters height and has a resolution of less than 1 centimeter. That means that the pixel size is less than a centimeter, and we're getting a really good view of the reef. So how do drones help us monitor? The type of sampling that is done with the tape that we talked about is called a transect, and it's single dimensionality. So even when multiple transects are done, because replicates are done at the same time, we're only getting that single dimension. When we're adding drone data, we can see in 2 dimensions if just a single image, and then because we're getting length and width. And if we add in multiple drone images, we are able to then use photogrammetry to get a 3D image. And that gives us, obviously, 3 dimensions. So here's an example of what transects are like. You have these 3 areas, and they're replicates. So the researcher will count along and identify species along the line. 3 or 4 replications of the transect are taken and then averaged together to give a possible view of the reef. And this is just single dimension because it's 1 line and it's averaged together. So here is a photo of the reef. In this photo, it's hard to tell that these patches of reef are actually several meters in dimension, but it's a single image, and you can get the width as well as the length. And you're able to look at this multiple times if you want. And you can see here some algae that I circled. And the researcher can come back to look at that. So here's 3D data. I mean, we've seen several people talk about some 3D imagery that they have looked at. And as most of you know, you go through and you fly your lawnmower pattern, and you get your overlapping images. So many overlapping images are taken along that pattern, and you get the 3D data. This gives us length and width and depth, which is really nice. That several hundreds of meters can be taken doing drones, and the reef that we're looking at is approximately 650 meters in length. So this is the reef that we're looking at. It's up in the north middle part of Saudi Arabia. If you look here in the corner, there's a little yellow strip that says 30 meters. That is where the transect was taken for this reef. You can see that quite a bit more of the reef is visible and measured than this 30-meter section right here. So obviously this isn't the whole reef. You can see more reef back behind that isn't taken. So even with drones, they have limitations. So if you're, still have issues with getting everything, but it is much more than what is available currently. So as you saw, the drone takes pictures and then we places them in an overlapping position to get 3D. When the photo is taken, it has the GPS coordinate. However, where is the coordinate on the photo here? Like if I say this photo is taken at XY, where does that happen at? Does it happen here? Is that where the XY is at? Is it here? Is it in the corner? Is it in the center? And this is a pretty big question. However, when you take multiple photos and you overlap them, the software says, okay, this is where this photo is at, this is where this photo is at, and it actually looks at the pixels and is looking for those numbers that are in that pixel, and it's trying to match, hey, this pixel color and this pixel color are the same, and it's matching this together. And so it's looking for those values, and the more accurate those values are, the better the placement is. So if we look here, this is an image that it's the same image. On the left here, we have the image as it is, that it came like just from the drone. And then on this side, we have the corrected version where I just removed some of the extreme values. So this is one of the things that makes doing drone work with water slightly different than something like on land, or if you're like monitoring like a building or construction site, is that the water is blue and it makes everything look blue. And so we're needing to remove some of those. It doesn't change the image. It doesn't like say, okay, if you had something on here and it had, you know, this particular color, like it's not removing that color, it's just taking the extreme values out. It's just making it not quite as blue, and you can see that it's quite a bit more sharp. Okay, so why does this matter with photogrammetry and the things that we're looking at? So if we look here at this, I hope it plays the video. Okay, so here is the same section of the reef. Let's watch it for a second. So this is the blue that hasn't been corrected for color. And if you can see, like some of these sides are kind of like blobby. It doesn't come in clear. So I want you to compare that to this side with the colored imagery. And you can see that the sides are sharper. The depth areas are clearer. It's the exact same imagery. One is just cleaned up and one isn't. And we're able to see. So a lot of people might think, oh, you just want a pretty looking image, but it's not about like making the image more attractive. It's about making the image like more like useful. So if we're looking here, here's some satellite imagery that's just on a map, and then we can see what happens when we bring in that blue image. So you can see it's jumping, it's about a meter off. And if we see this colored image, it comes right through and it is right aligned. There's no jumping, it's just right in place. And so because it's color corrected, because of that, the imagery is able to georeference it better and get that in the right location. So it's not about just getting it in place. It's about, I mean, it's not about having nice pictures. It's about like getting it to be more functional and more accurate. All right, so what are some of the things that we can see in this image now that we've gone through some of the background? Because the cell size is so much smaller, you can see a lot more detail. These are all images from the same image. So this is the main large image. And then if we zoom in, you can still see like, this is a really good detail, right? Like we're zoomed in really close and we're still not at pixel length, like pixel size. So we're seeing corals, we're able to see fish, we're able to see algae, we're able to look deeper into this image. And I think that's really cool because like we're a lot of times for marine science, you're at a reef for like an hour or two and then you're gone. And then you're going to another reef, you're looking at something else. You just have like your notes and you have what you had like there, you have some photos maybe. But I think this is really like cool that you can come back and look at it and take some time to really study what you're looking at. It doesn't mean that we don't need those in-person transects. We definitely still need all of that. This is just adding a different like view of the same area. So we're able to add, not take away. So here are some things that we're able to do. We're able to classify this using the DEM, which is the digital elevation model. We're able to create a hillshade, which is here on the right, in this gray area, and that gives us a visualization of what we're looking at. So that gives us a visualization of that elevation, and that's done by the photogrammetry. And then we're able to take our elevation from our DEM and we're able to run the slope, and we're able to get like a lot of information from that. We're able to say, oh, I see a crack on the reef. What is the slope of that crack? What am I seeing? Does it match up? How much of the reef is actually like edge? What do I see from that? What is the difference? So there's a lot of questions that I'm having by looking at this where I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. And we can take this classification and we can add the slope and the elevation, and we can create more classifications of habitats and things that are happening, like the geomorphology of what's happening with the reef. And then we can place that with the imagery and look for habitats and say, oh, here's something else. So I think that's really, really cool. I think that's pretty fast. It's cool for me. I hope it's cool for you. So here's another thing with the color, is that all of these things have color. So again, it's not about just the pixels looking nice or whatever. And this is a great way to classify things and objects, like algae, which has their own spectral profile, their own color that is showing up. So we can look at that color on the image itself, and we can get a spectral profile like this. And then I've also taken some algae samples to the lab and put it in through a spectrometer, which looks at the color of what's happening. And you can match those up. That's still in process, so I don't have any results of that yet. But you can match those spectral profiles from the algae and the spectral profile of what you're seeing in the image, and you can compare. So I think that's pretty cool. Okay. So what does this like kind of mean for animals or for the algae? So if we look at here, there's some sturgeon fish. Maybe you saw these guys when you were out snorkeling today. I like them. I think they're pretty. They're called sturgeon fish because these little red fins here on the edge are very sharp. They are herbivorous fish. They live on the top of the reef and are very territorial. Their territories are easy to spot in the water, as they're large tuffs of algae. However, it's really difficult to measure how big that territory is when you're in the water, right? Like it's hard to get that tape measure and like measure it around and get georeferencing of it and to know those things. So it's really nice to be able to look at it on the drone imagery. So I have a colleague, Matt, studies this family of fishes and who was certain the territories could be spotted using a drone because he had seen some evidence of that on satellite imagery. And so he was like, pretty sure that's a thing. And he was right. You can see these territories from drone imagery. It's quite clear where the boundary is, where it starts and ends. And this leads to lots of other questions. It can say, like, how big are the territories? Do they change over time? How many fish live in that particular territory, which is something that someone has to go out and count. So there is that in situ, still needing people to go out there in combination with the drone imagery survey. Is there any particular slopes or distances from the edge that these guys prefer? These are questions that we're still investigating, but I do have several of these territories on the reef to look at. And one of the things that I saw that I think is pretty cool is if you look right here, there's like a little patch where there's no algae. And in all of the territories, there's a patch about that size that doesn't have algae. And I have a question, like, because I don't know a ton about it, but the question I have is, why? Like, why is there a little section where there is an algae that they're like letting that be no algae, and it's about the same size and it's on all of the territories? Is that something happening? So I think what's really cool is, like, by looking at the imagery, someone who's not a sturgeon fish expert saw some patterns. We can see some different things, which I just think are really cool, just from a different perspective. So what are some challenges that we have? There are a lot of challenges. to drone imagery in water. Like I said, the water is blue. Just going out to a reef with a drone is sometimes difficult. There are still a real problem with the fact that a lot of the processing for drone imagery is meant for people who are looking at things on land or construction sites or things like that. And so a lot of the software doesn't recognize it. A lot of it is me having to correct it and move it over and to change it. And sometimes it drops the locational data unexpectedly, and then I don't have anything there. And sometimes the drones stop taking images unexpectedly, and so you have gaps in your data, and it's hard to go right back out and check that until you come back and you're already past that reef. Another problem is shadow, right? When a cloud comes by, you have a shadow in the middle of the day, and that's not as difficult in the land, but on the water, it changes the texture of like what you're seeing, and sometimes the imagery can seem like it's deeper than it is because it's seeing darker and it thinks deeper. So there's a lot of challenges that are happening just purely because it's happening on water as opposed to land. So if you have any ideas, please, I'm open to help. This is a project that's still in process. I'm excited about the challenges in the last slide because like going through and looking at this pixel change and seeing how we can fix things is interesting to me. As I spoke earlier, the project is aiming towards a better accuracy in habitat mapping using a variety of classification techniques, including the object orientation and spectral profile classification. And I'm looking forward to see what new information can be applied to the species of algae and fish here in the Red Sea, so we can learn more about protecting the reefs. Thank you very much, and open for questions and comments. Help.
All right. Thank you, Colleen, for being brave enough to take robots out of the lab and for your wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much for a very interesting presentation, Colleen. My question is more related to, I would say, education aspect of what you are doing here at KAUST. So I guess you don't have an engineering background, but you are using engineering tools to build a map of coral. So what are the challenges did you face when you're using tools from the engineering field for your research?
So I am a geographer. So like most of the tools that I'm using are geography tools. Like they're tools that I'm familiar with from previous work that I've done. One of the challenges that I was saying was like, it's really difficult to, when the software and stuff like that I'm used to is directed towards land projects. So that's one of the biggest challenges. Another challenge I would say is I am using a drone, but I don't know how to take apart a drone. I don't know how to fix the drone to do what I want it to do. And so I think sometimes I'm frustrated because I see something in my mind that I want, but I don't have that skill set to modify what I'm using. It's just basically the tool that I have, and I have to do what's best with that. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges for me is, yeah, I'm blending a bunch of worlds together, but I'm not an expert in all of those worlds, right? So I think that's a big challenge. Any other questions?
Yeah, thank you for the talk, Colleen. And was wondering, so you have the drone, and whether the data from the drone is enough to assess the health of the coral, or would be actually helpful to get measurements, let's say, from an underwater robot, right? So that can get much closer, right? So to the corals.
So I do have some ground control points that I have, which are black and white. So those definitely help with me understanding if the color is changing too much, like if I'm correcting it. But again, I'm not sure what we can do to make that oh, if I had something perfect, like what colors to match that out. I that's one of the questions I've also had, but I still don't know the answer as well. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, but I definitely have thought about that. I just still don't have an answer.
Okay, thank you, Colleen.
Thank you.